Our travel wouldn't be complete without a trip to an old mill in Denmark. The sketch is pretty simple, but we need to follow the rule of perspective to make the picture look beautiful. First step is to set the horizon line and assign a vanishing point within that line. Next, all the lines that you will draw on the plane should intersect on the vanishing point to ensure correct perspective. So here, as we draw the road, all the lines should be directed to one vanishing point within the horizon line. This is what we call one-point perspective. Now let's draw the wood posts on both sides of the road. I just make a rough sketch and keep it very loose. Lastly, let's draw the old mill here on top of the horizon line. I start with the roof, then a basic outline of the structure, and lastly the turbines. I draw some details in the middle ground to enhance the composition. These details don't have to be a particular object. Lines and shapes will actually do the work. Now let's begin. I moisten the entire page with spray bottle. Next, I mix the color of my sky, still using Amethyst Genuine and Horizon Blue. I make the mix leaning towards the blue shade to create a bright kind of day. Don't forget to make the upper parts darker for aerial perspective. Next, I get ochre and some green mix to paint the horizon. I tilt my paper a bit to avoid backflows of paint. I vary my strokes ranging from flat, horizontal stroke to dabbing of brush and splattering of paints to make my landscape more interesting. Since the subject looks too plain because of very minimal elements in it, we create added interest by varying our brush strokes as we portray the bushes and grass on road. As I paint the greens on the road, there should be a transition of light to dark from the vanishing point going out. The direction of my stroke should also follow the direction of the fragment. For example, as I paint the grass in between the road, I did swift diagonal stroke from the vanishing point going out. Then as I paint the meadow, I did horizontal strokes as base wash, then drop some greens to portray the grass. Here, I paint the soil using burnt sienna. Let's splatter some thick yellow ochre paint to portray flowers in the foreground. I also add splatters of burnt sienna to create accents and connection in colors in the foreground. I scratch the bush to create texture on this solid blob of color. I dry the paper completely, then I will paint the wooden post. Using a synthetic brush, I paint each one with a dry stroke. The paint should be thick enough to stand out among the greens at the background. I create dimension even on this post by darkening one side of it. Next, I connect it to the ground by adding grass blade strokes using dark green paint. Let's enhance the road fragment with few dark strokes. I go back to painting the wooden post with dark paint to define the sides. Next, let's paint the windmill using leftover paints. Remember the principle I shared when painting the hot air balloons? We make the same principle in this step. We make the shape look rounded as we create a transition in the tonal value, putting dark tones on the shadowed part and light tones on the lighted part. Next, let's paint the roof and the turbines. Notice that I paint the turbines with very dark and thick color because I want it to look so sharp. Since it is our focal point, it has to stand out. And the only way to do that is to make it darker in tone. Let's paint the base and create impression of fence around it using dry strokes. Now I'm adding some spots of dark burnt sienna and dark green color on the foreground to further enhance and define the road fragment. As you do this step, make it just a few yet systematic spots of strokes. The main purpose of this step is to contour the road using suggestive strokes or lines. You don't need to outline the road with a straight line. Broken spots of color is a better and not distracting way to contour the shape. Let's finalize by adding tiny grass strokes in the middle ground and foreground. You can also add final splatters of thick yellow paint in the foreground. Lastly, darken the turbines as needed. You can also add very tiny strokes of birds in the sky to make it look more pretty. This is our final painting. For our next lesson, we will be focusing on creating rough textures using the unique properties of granulating watercolors.